Keep him close.
The sound of shattering tempered glass violently pierced the air. Three heavy-set men swung metal baseball bats relentlessly against the reinforced front doors of the isolated glass mansion, standing alone in the freezing Oakhaven pine forest. Maya Sterling stumbled backward. Her arms tightened around baby Leo, who was screaming in sheer terror against her chest. Her breathing was jagged, her eyes wide with absolute desperation. "Let me go out!" Maya trembled, her voice cracking under the weight of panic. "They're Marx's men. He sent them to collect the debt. I can't let you and your daughter get dragged into this. Open the doors!" She lunged forward, but a rough hand suddenly reached out, gripping her shoulder with unyielding force. A hand covered entirely in jagged, brutal burn scars. Elias Vance stepped in front of her. For the first time in 4 years of locking himself away from the world, the billionaire architect reached up and yanked down the collar of his thick turtleneck. He exposed the horrific, uneven expanse of scar tissue stretching from his jawline down to his collarbone. His face was stone cold. He pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Chief Miller?" Elias's deep, gravelly voice cut through the chaos. "Send the rapid response team to my estate right now. We have armed trespassers on private property, and I've just authorized my AI security system to use lethal force." The wail of police sirens ripped through the freezing night. 7 days earlier. 12 months ago, Maya Sterling was signing off on load-bearing blueprints for skyscrapers in downtown Chicago. She was a structural field engineer, a woman who understood every millimeter of steel, every ton of concrete. She knew exactly how to keep massive physical structures from collapsing. But she couldn't keep her own life from falling apart. The collapse didn't come from a technical error. It came from a forged signature on a stack of underground loan documents. Marcus Thorne, her gambling-addicted ex-husband, had secretly used her credentials to mortgage all their assets, drained the cash, and vanished. The debt collectors didn't care who actually spent the money. They only cared whose name was on the dotted line. Maya's engineering license was suspended, pending investigation. Her bank accounts were frozen. Her apartment was foreclosed on a gray winter morning. From a proud chief engineer, she became a hunted debtor, left with absolutely nothing, fleeing the city with her newborn son. The sputtering roar of the engine ripped Maya back to her brutal reality. The beat-up Ford pickup she had bought, with her last few dollars of cash, was choking halfway up the Oakhaven mountain pass. Outside, a historic blizzard was swallowing the Colorado ranges. Snow battered the windshield like shards of broken glass. The wipers were jammed solid. The dim headlights barely pierced a few feet into the blinding, frozen whiteout. Then a hollow pop echoed from under the hood. Smoke hissed out. The engine died completely. The silence that followed was thick and terrifying. Without the engine, the heater let out its final breath. The temperature inside the cab began to free fall into the negatives. Maya turned to the passenger seat. Baby Leo, just 6 months old, was curled up inside a frayed wool blanket. He wasn't crying. That was the most terrifying part. When a child gets too cold, they lose the energy to cry. Leo's tiny lips were taking on a terrifying shade of blue, his breathing as thin as mist. "No, no, no. Leo, look at me," Maya whispered frantically. She ripped off her own puffer jacket, wrapping it tightly around his small body. Her trembling hands gripped her phone. No service. Trapped in a blizzard at an elevation of 6,000 feet, she was entirely cut off from civilization. The engineer who had calculated load-bearing weights for thousands of people was now utterly powerless to generate heat for her own flesh and blood. Maya clutched Leo to her chest, kicked the truck door open, and stepped out. The freezing wind slapped her face like invisible razor blades, stripping away whatever meager warmth she had left. Her boots sank deep into the snowdrifts. Squinting through the whiteout, she spotted a faint glimmer of light, about half a mile away, a massive structure of glass and timber jutted out from the cliffside like a solitary fortress. It was her only hope. Biting her lip until it bled just to stay conscious, Maya lowered her head and dragged her heavy, freezing legs through the white hell. Inside that fortress, the temperature was maintained at a flawless 72 degrees. Elias Vance sat in the security control room, the glow from dozens of monitors illuminating his sharp jawline and the thick turtleneck pulled high to hide the scars. For 4 years, ever since the horrific car crash that claimed his wife's life, Elias had locked himself in this room. The visionary billionaire architect was now just a shadow, crippled by severe post-traumatic stress disorder. He was terrified of variables. He completely shut out the outside world. An infrared camera flashed a red warning on his screen. A thermal signature was approaching the main gates. Elias frowned. Through the monitors, he watched a battered woman holding a small bundle, desperately pounding her bare fists against his reinforced glass. She was screaming something, but the soundproof engineering blocked it all out. Elias exhaled, his eyes cold and devoid of emotion. He didn't run a charity. He didn't deal with strangers. Reaching for the desk phone, he prepared to call the highway patrol so they could send a snowplow to haul this woman away. But his finger froze right above the keypad. Chloe, his 6-year-old daughter, was standing in the doorway. She wore a white nightgown, clutching a ragged teddy bear. The trauma from the crash years ago had left Chloe almost entirely blind. But Asperger's syndrome had gifted her with superhuman hearing. She could hear the heartbeat of a sparrow landing on the roof. Ignoring her usual extreme wariness of the world, Chloe walked barefoot into the massive living room, heading straight for the glass wall, separating them from the blizzard. She pressed one tiny hand against the freezing pane. She tilted her head slightly, listening. "Chloe, step back," Elias called out, his voice thick with gravel. She didn't turn around, she just murmured in a flat, emotionless tone, processing the world through the strict physics and logic she understood. "Dad, the audio frequency is slowing down. The small creature's heart rate has dropped below 40 beats a minute. The fluid in the lungs is freezing. The load-bearing structure is about to completely collapse. Critical system failure." Elias froze. "Dad." Chloe turned her head, her cloudy eyes pointing in his general direction. "We have to open the door." Elias looked at his daughter, then back at the monitors. The woman was slowly sliding down into the snowdrift, her arms still wrapped fiercely around the child like a final, desperate shield. The innocent words of an autistic child acted like a scalpel, slicing right through the perfect armor Elias had spent 4 years building. He couldn't let another living structure collapse right in front of his eyes. Not again. Elias stepped up to the control panel. His scarred hand slammed down on the red button. The electronic deadbolt echoed with a loud, hollow clack. The fortress doors slowly swung open, letting the raging blizzard pour in, and bringing with it an irreversible change to all of their lives. 8 a.m. Elias pushed open the heavy oak door to his design studio. The air was thick with the smell of dark roast coffee, but his footsteps abruptly stopped. On the drafting table, the A0 printout of the Cliffside Museum. Yum. His billion-dollar masterpiece and current dead end was no longer pristine. The paper was covered in red pencil, crossed-out lines, heavy arrows, and a chaotic sprawl of mathematical equations. Elias's chest tightened. His severe OCD, his absolute need for control, had been violated. The jagged scars on his neck flushed a furious red. He snatched the blueprint off the table and stormed down the hall toward the kitchen, his heavy footsteps echoing against the hardwood. Maya was carefully feeding baby Leo a spoonful of oatmeal. She was swallowed up in an oversized, borrowed knit sweater. Slam! Elias slammed the blueprint down onto the marble island, rattling the glass tumblers. "What the hell is this?" Elias growled, his gray eyes piercing her like razor blades. I give you shelter, food, and in exchange, you clean this house. You do not turn my architectural studio into a coloring book." Maya didn't flinch. She calmly set the plastic spoon down on the bowl, wiped Leo's mouth with a napkin, and slowly stood to her full height. Her eyes were no longer those of a desperate, fleeing refugee in a blizzard. They were the eyes of a chief field engineer. "Those aren't doodles," Maya said, her voice cold and definitive. "You're designing a massive concrete structure, cantilevered 60 feet out over a cliff. You're terrified it's going to collapse, so you crammed 4 massive reinforced concrete pillars right at the fulcrum. You think you're anchoring it, but in reality, you just added 6,000 tons of dead weight to the structure." Elias frowned, his fury giving way to a mix of shock and mockery. "And what do you know about aerodynamics? I have to engineer this to withstand the wind shear of a Category 5 hurricane." "You're not blocking the wind, you're building a sail." Maya cut him off, her calloused index finger tapping hard against the red lines on the paper. "Look at what I corrected. Cut those 2 colossal pillars. Replace them with a post-tensioned underground cable system running parallel to the main beam, integrated with an internal X-braced steel network. The wind load will dissipate and transfer directly into the granite bedrock. You don't have to brute force it." The silence in the kitchen was suffocating. Elias stood paralyzed. The highly specialized terminology spilling from the mouth of a house square was sharp, precise, and ruthlessly accurate. Without another word, Elias grabbed Maya's wrist, not violently, but with an overwhelming, urgent intensity, and pulled her down the hall toward the server room. "Input it," Elias demanded, shoving a keyboard toward her, pointing at the supercomputer, running the structural simulation software. Maya sat down. Her fingers flew across the keys with lightning speed, a muscle memory she thought she had lost forever. She recalibrated the parameters, adjusted the safety factors, and altered the material compositions to match the red numbers she had scribbled. Elias held his breath and hit run. The 3D model on the monitor began to violently shake under the simulated hurricane winds. In Elias's original design, the joints always flashed a glaring warning red, signaling an imminent fracture. But now, supported by Maya's post-tension cable system, the heat map slowly transitioned into a smooth, perfectly stable green. Text flashed across the center of the screen. Structural integrity, 100%. Material optimization, 38% cost reduction. The hum of the server cooling fans filled the deafening silence between the two. Elias slowly turned to look at the woman sitting in front of the monitors, his defensive walls, his arrogance, and the condescending pity he had felt for her evaporated completely. Only a profound, earth-shattering respect remained. "You're not a cleaner," Elias's voice had lost its gravelly edge. "Who are you?" Maya looked him dead in the eye. "Maya Sterling, former structural field engineer for the K&B Group, Chicago. Right up until my ex-husband forged my signature to borrow black market money and destroyed my engineering license." Elias looked down at the red-marked blueprint. Suddenly, he reached out and almost unconsciously rolled up both sleeves of his heavy sweater, fully exposing the twisted, deformed burn scars wrapping around his forearms. It was the gesture of a warrior, voluntarily laying down his shield. 4 years ago, Elias said softly, his eyes glued to the 3D model. "A contractor skimped on the steel's core in my design. The scaffolding collapsed. My wife was under it. Ever since that night, I calculate everything through fear." Maya looked at his scars, her voice dropping into a gentle but unyielding tone. "Fear only builds underground bunkers, Elias. It doesn't build masterpieces." Right at that moment, the faint sound of bare footsteps echoed in the room. Chloe, his visually impaired daughter, walked in. Today she wasn't clutching her ragged teddy bear. For the past 3 days, Chloe hadn't allowed Maya within 6 feet of her. But now, the autistic little girl slowly walked forward. She reached out her tiny, pale hand, gently brushing against and then grasping Maya's calloused fingers. Chloe tilted her head, her cloudy eyes blinking softly. "Your heart rate is 72 beats per minute," Chloe murmured, the corners of her mouth twitching upward into a very rare, faint smile. "The structure is very stable. It's safe." Elias stood frozen, watching his daughter connect with a stranger. For the first time in 1,400 days of drowning in darkness, the massive, suffocating boulder crushing his chest felt like it had finally crumbled to dust. The blizzard finally broke on the morning of the fourth day. The roaring winds died down, leaving behind a deceptively peaceful landscape of pristine white snow. Inside the glass fortress, the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Maya and Elias had spent 3 sleepless nights working side by side. The museum's structural blueprint was now flawless. But with the clearing skies came the return of cellular service. A sharp ping echoed through the kitchen. Maya picked up her phone. Her blood ran cold. The screen was flooded with dozens of missed calls, followed by a single, terrifying text message from an unknown number. "The GPS tracker on your truck finally pinged. We know where you are. We're coming for what's ours." Before Maya could even shout a warning to Elias, the violent roar of modified engines ripped through the quiet forest. 3 black, heavily armored SUVs tore up the snow-covered driveway, tires skidding on the ice before slamming to a halt, completely surrounding the glass house. Men piled out, their boots crunching heavily against the frozen ground. They wielded metal baseball bats and heavy crowbars. Smash! The sound of shattering tempered glass violently pierced the air as the lead thug swung his bat against the reinforced front doors. Maya stumbled backward into the grand foyer. Her arms tightened desperately around baby Leo, who was screaming in sheer terror against her chest. Her breathing was jagged, her eyes wide with absolute desperation. "Let me go out!" Maya trembled, her voice cracking under the weight of panic. "They're Marx's men. He sent them to collect the debt. I can't let you and your daughter get dragged into this. Open the doors!" She lunged forward, ready to sacrifice herself, but a rough hand suddenly reached out, gripping her shoulder with unyielding force. A hand covered entirely in jagged, brutal burn scars. Elias Vance stepped in front of her. For the first time in 4 years of locking himself away from the world, the billionaire architect reached up and yanked down the collar of his thick turtleneck. He exposed the horrific, uneven expanse of scar tissue stretching from his jawline down to his collarbone. He wasn't hiding anymore. His face was stone cold. He pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Chief Miller?" Elias's deep, gravelly voice cut through the chaos. "Send the rapid response team to my estate right now. We have armed trespassers on private property, and I've just authorized my AI security system to use lethal force." Outside, the lead thug sneered, pressing his face against the spiderweb cracks of the glass. "Send her out, Vance. We know who she is. She's a disgraced engineer on the run for a $2 million syndicate debt. You really want the press to know the great reclusive billionaire is harboring a wanted fraudster." Maya shrank back, the shame and terror threatening to pull her under. But Elias didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his scarred hand pressing flat against the glass, matching the thug's glare with terrifying absolute authority. "You think you've done your homework?" Elias's voice boomed through the exterior intercom system, cold, calculated, and utterly lethal. "Let me educate you. While you were busy driving up my mountain, my legal team in New York filed a massive fraud dossier with the FBI. We handed over the digital footprints, the IP addresses, and the forged signature logs that Maya extracted from your own system. We proved Marcus Thorne orchestrated the entire scheme." The thug's sneer faltered. His grip on the baseball bat loosened. "Your boss isn't getting paid," Elias continued, his gray eyes narrowing into slits. "He's getting a federal indictment. As for you, you have exactly 60 seconds before 3 heavily armed tactical units seal off this mountain. If you drop your weapons and lie face down in the snow, you might survive to see the inside of a jail cell. If you strike my house one more time, you will not leave this property breathing. A low mechanical hum vibrated from the ceiling of the portico. The automated security turret silently pivoted. 3 blinding red laser dots appeared, locking dead center onto the chests of the 3 armed men. The red dots held perfectly steady. Absolute panic set in. The metal bat slipped from the leader's hand, clattering loudly against the icy pavement. In the distance, the wail of police sirens ripped through the freezing night, growing deafeningly loud. Within seconds, armored police cruisers tore up the driveway, red and blue lights flashing violently, completely boxing in the SUVs. Armed officers swarmed the men, wrestling them into the snow and clicking handcuffs onto their wrists. Elias stood tall as he watched the threat being neutralized. He didn't turn away. He didn't pull his collar back up to hide his scars. Slowly, he turned back to Maya. She was trembling, holding Leo, tears streaming down her face, not from fear, but from a profound, shattering relief. Chloe padded quietly into the room, her small hands covering her sensitive ears against the siren noise. Elias knelt down, scooping his daughter into his strong arms, then looked up at Maya. The structural integrity held, Elias said softly, his eyes steady and fiercely reassuring. No one is breaking this house, and no one is taking you anywhere. 1 month later. The wind carried the mountain chill through the massive hall, completely flooded with camera flashes. The unveiling of the nation's largest Cliffside Museum project had drawn hundreds of reporters. The media was in an absolute frenzy. Because after 4 grueling years of locking himself in the shadows, the reclusive billionaire Elias Vance had finally appeared. Elias stepped up to the podium. Gone was the familiar dark turtleneck hiding his insecurities. Elias wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, the collar of his dress shirt left unbuttoned, completely exposing the jagged, uneven burn scars stretching from his jawline down to his chest. He wasn't hiding anymore. The scars now looked like the cracks on a newly reinforced concrete wall, proud, rough, but absolutely unbreakable. Elias tapped his finger lightly against the microphone. The entire hall instantly fell dead silent. He looked straight down at the front row. This project was once a dead blueprint. Elias's deep, booming voice echoed across the auditorium. It was drafted in panic, carrying thousands of tons of dead weight born out of fear. Had it been built, it would have inevitably collapsed. But today, I am not standing here as the sole creator of this masterpiece. Elias extended his hand toward the audience. Allow me to introduce the woman who personally crossed out the cowardice in my designs, the person who used her brilliant expertise to keep this structure and myself from collapsing in the storm. The chief engineer and co-founder of this project, Ms. Maya Sterling. The stage spotlights aimed directly at Maya. She wasn't wearing some flashy, glamorous evening gown designed just to be a backdrop for a powerful man. She wore a sharply cut black suit, her hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail. Her eyes blazed, her spine as straight as a steel beam, as she stepped proudly up to the podium, amidst a thunderous standing ovation. Her heart had once been shattered by the unjust theft of her career, but today, her dignity was fully restored right at the glittering pinnacle of the architectural world. The scene shifts. A windy afternoon at the actual construction site of the museum. The sounds of pile drivers and cranes intertwined, creating a loud, chaotic symphony of life. Maya, wearing a white hard hat, with an A0 blueprint tucked tightly under her arm, was decisively barking orders at the foundation-pouring crew. A few steps away, Elias leaned against the tailgate of a pickup truck. He held baby Leo in his arms, carefully pulling the little boy's beanie down to keep out the chill. Right at their feet, visually impaired Chloe sat safely on the ground. She was meticulously stacking Lego bricks, murmuring numbers in time with the rhythmic thud of the excavators. For the first time in her life, Chloe's toy structures weren't closed off, isolated defensive bunkers anymore. She was building a bridge, a solid, sturdy bridge reaching out to connect two sides across the empty space. Elias walked over, handing Maya a warm cup of coffee. Their eyes met amidst the windy construction site. There was no cheesy, overly romantic kiss. There were no sappy, tear-filled vows. Between them lay only the blueprint of a new life that had just laid its foundation, solid, perfect, and impossible for any storm to tear down.